September 1759. A pale moon hangs low over the St. Lawrence River. Beneath it, the water moves like dark glass, broken only by the faint rhythm of oars. In the silence, hundreds of men, red-coated soldiers of the British Army, glide toward a shadowed cliff. Their muskets are slung across their backs, their breath clouds in the night air. Above them looms the sheer rock face of Quebec, the final obstacle between empire and annihilation. One misplaced sound, one loose stone, and the entire army could be thrown into the river below. They are not yet heroes. Only men praying at dawn will find them alive. General James Wolfe stands in the prow of his small boat, his face lit by the ghostly reflection of the moon. He is 22 years younger than his king, but age has come quickly in war. His body, weakened by illness, trembles beneath the scarlet coat. Yet his eyes, hollow and determined, are fixed on the cliffs. This is his moment. The river's current pushes back against him like fate itself. But Wolfe has gambled everything that Britain's empire will rise or fall with this single stroke. In the stillness, one can almost hear his heartbeat over the whisper of water against wood. The boats reach the narrow cove known to local guides as the Anse au Foulon. The cliffs are steep, nearly 200 feet high. From above, the French sentries see only darkness. They cannot imagine that an army is climbing beneath them. Wolfe gives the quiet signal, and the first soldiers begin their ascent, hauling themselves upward by roots and stones. Boots slip. Muskets clatter against rock. Each sound feels like a death sentence. But discipline, that most British of virtues, holds. One by one, the men disappear into the night, swallowed by the cliff. By dawn, the miracle is complete. Thousands of redcoats stand on the heights of Abraham, the open plain behind Quebec's walls. The French have not yet stirred. In the distance, the city's cathedral towers glimmer faintly through the morning mist. For a brief, trembling moment, the world is silent. Then the drums begin to beat. The Union Jack rises against the pale sky, and the soldiers form their lines with cold precision. The impossible has been done. A full British army now stands poised to strike at the heart of New France. Only hours earlier, the campaign had seemed doomed. For months, Wolfe's army had camped along the river, bombarding Quebec, but gaining nothing. His men were sick with dysentery. Supplies were running low. The French commander, the Marquis de Montcalm, had fortified every approach, confident that no sane enemy would attempt the cliffs. In London, ministers feared another colonial disaster. And yet, against all counsel and probability, Wolfe had chosen the one path no general dared. A night assault where failure meant ruin. It was not merely strategy, it was faith. For Wolfe, this campaign was as much spiritual as it was military. He had been raised in the shadow of his father's service, bred in the strict code of British honor. But in Quebec, he carried something deeper, a belief that Britain's destiny was to bring light where others brought despotism. In his tent, he read Milton's Paradise Lost and whispered lines of poetry to himself, even as cannon fire shook the air outside. Some said he was too sensitive for war. Others saw in him the strange fire of a man who believed death itself could serve a purpose. The 7 Years' War had raged across continents, in Europe, the Caribbean, India, and the American frontier. It was the first truly global conflict, and both Britain and France understood its stakes: the control of trade, of colonies, of the very idea of empire. In North America, the struggle had reached a stalemate. French Canada stretched vast and fortified, its rivers guarded, its alliances with indigenous nations strong. The British, though superior at sea, had failed repeatedly to breach Quebec's defenses. To most observers, it was France that seemed destined to endure. But history is rarely kind to what seems inevitable. Now, on the morning of the 13th, the tide has turned. As the sun rises, the British lines stand immaculate, 2 ranks deep, bayonets glinting. Each man knows this ground will soon be bloodied. The air tastes of iron and smoke. From the city, alarm bells begin to toll, echoing down the river valley. The French garrison scrambles to arms. In the streets, civilians pray and flee. On the walls, Montcalm receives word of the impossible. The enemy is already on the heights. The two generals could not have been more different. Montcalm, the noble Frenchman, worldly and chivalric, believed in the honor of open battle. Wolfe, the restless Englishman, frail yet fierce, believed in decisive action, in the cold, surgical strike that ended the war in a single day. Fate has drawn them together, not as enemies of hatred, but as instruments of history. Each understands that by nightfall, one of them will be dead, and the world they know will have changed forever. As the troops tighten their formations, and the last of the morning fog burns away, Wolfe surveys the field. The city of Quebec lies ahead, still wreathed in smoke from the months of bombardment. Behind him, the St. Lawrence gleams like polished steel, the artery that has carried Britain's empire across the seas. He knows his plan has worked, but victory is not yet certain. He turns to an officer and murmurs a final order. "We will give them the English volley." It is calm, almost tender, the voice of a man at peace with what is to come. And so, as the sun climbs higher over the heights, the fate of nations converges upon a single patch of earth. The silence that follows feels heavier than cannon fire. The pause before history draws breath. The battle has not yet begun. But in that still morning air, one can sense it already. The end of an old world, and the birth of a new. The morning mist over Quebec still lingers. But our story now widens, far beyond the cliffs and the clash to come. For the struggle unfolding here is only one part of something vast, something that spans oceans and continents. Two empires, Britain and France, stand locked in the most sweeping conflict the world has yet known, the 7 Years' War. What began as a frontier quarrel has become a global reckoning for mastery of trade, territory, and the future itself. In London, the air is charged with anxiety and ambition. The capital hums with the tension of a nation at war. Merchant ships crowd the Thames, soldiers march through narrow streets, and newspapers carry dispatches from every corner of the world. At the heart of this storm stands one man, William Pitt the Elder, Britain's wartime architect, a statesman of volcanic energy and moral conviction. Pitt sees this conflict not as a mere struggle for colonies, but as a divine opportunity, a test of Britain's destiny as the world's new maritime power. Pitt's gamble is immense. He pours money into the Royal Navy, dispatches fleets to India, the Caribbean, and North America, and promises victory not through numbers, but through will. "I know that I can save this country," he declares in Parliament, "and that no one else can." Many think him arrogant. Others call him a visionary. But his strategy is unmistakable. Strike the enemy where they are weakest, and use the ocean, Britain's natural element, as the empire's sword. It is an audacious plan, built on risk and faith in a navy that rules the waves, but has not yet proven it can shape the continents. Across the Channel, France faces a darker horizon. Its armies in Europe are formidable, its culture refined and proud. But its overseas empire, from India to Louisiana, is stretched to breaking point. The French crown, burdened by debt, struggles to feed both its wars and its people. In New France, Governor Louis-Joseph de Montcalm commands an army that is brave but threadbare. Supplies from the homeland are scarce. The Atlantic, now prowled by British warships, has become a graveyard of French convoys. For Montcalm, Quebec is not just a city. It is the final citadel of French civilization in North America. If it falls, an entire world will fall with it. The contrast between the two nations could not be starker. Britain's power is mercantile and restless, driven by trade, invention, and the ceaseless hunger of a rising middle class. France is aristocratic and rooted in honor, its generals bound by codes as old as chivalry. Where Pitt speaks of opportunity, Montcalm speaks of duty. Where the British war machine grows from the docks and counting houses of London, the French rely on the loyalty of their allies, the indigenous nations who have long balanced between the two European powers. Yet both sides are haunted by the same truth. This is not simply a war of kings, but a war for the shape of the modern world. Whoever commands North America commands the future. The continent's forests and rivers, its fur trade and fertile lands, promise an empire without end. For Britain, the conquest of Quebec would sever France from its colonies and open the gateway to continental dominance. For France, defending Quebec means preserving its honor and holding back the tide of English expansion that threatens to consume half the globe. In this great game, generals and soldiers become pieces on a board they cannot see. Wolfe, across the Atlantic, fights not just for tactical victory, but for Pitt's vision of global supremacy. Montcalm, isolated and under siege, fights for a France that may already be slipping away. The weight of empires presses upon their shoulders, though neither man will live to see how completely their struggle transforms the world. At home, ordinary Britons feel the war in ways both distant and intimate. Taxes rise, sons vanish into regiments. Newspapers praise triumphs and mourn disasters in the same breath. But there is also pride, a swelling sense that Britain is no longer a small island nation, but something greater. The victories at Louisbourg and in India have stirred dreams of empire. Coffeehouses buzz with talk of trade routes and conquests. The war, for all its cost, has become a mirror in which Britons see their destiny reflected. The emergence of a global identity built on courage. Commerce and command of the seas. Across the ocean, in the narrow streets of Quebec, Montcalm walks the ramparts at dusk. The air smells of smoke and pine. He knows the British will attack again. He feels it in the rhythm of their bombardments and the silence that follows. He has written to Paris, pleading for reinforcements, but the sea gives none. France's navy is shattered, its ships burned or blockaded. He looks west, across the vast wilderness of Canada. Thousands of miles of river and forest that his men can no longer defend. If Quebec falls, he confides to a fellow officer, Canada is lost. There is no bravado in his tone, only weary certainty. For both Pitt and Montcalm, this war has become a test of belief. Pitt fights for the idea that Britain's destiny is expansion, that freedom and empire are not contradictions but partners. Montcalm fights for a world already fading, the old order of Europe, transplanted to new soil. In their decisions, we glimpse two visions of humanity's future. One of restless ambition, the other of noble endurance. As the British ships anchor once more along the St. Lawrence and Wolfe's army prepares for its final stroke, both empires hold their breath. The coming battle will not merely decide Quebec, it will decide which civilization commands the next century. And when dawn breaks again over those cliffs, it will not be kings or ministers who bear the cost, but the men in the mud, soldiers who climb into history, carrying the weight of worlds on their backs. By midsummer, Quebec has become a city under siege, suspended between fire and water. The St. Lawrence River gleams beneath a relentless sun, its surface alive with the silhouettes of British warships. For weeks, the guns of His Majesty's fleet have thundered without mercy, sending arcs of fire across the river into the city's stone walls. Each night, the sky burns orange. Each morning, new ruins rise where homes once stood. The campaign that began in confidence has turned into an ordeal of endurance, not just of armies, but of human spirit. Inside the city, the people of Quebec huddle in cellars as shells crash through roofs and church towers. The Cathedral of Notre Dame de Quebec lies scarred, its spire shattered by British shots. Smoke rolls through narrow streets. Food grows scarce. Disease creeps through the wounded and the weary. Governor Montcalm walks among the rubble with a face set in stoic calm, his uniform caked in dust. He cannot save the city's beauty, but he can still defend its honor. To his officers, he repeats the same command: hold until the river freezes. If they can survive the season, the British will have to withdraw before winter ice seals them in. Survival, not victory, has become France's measure of hope. Across the river, in the British camp at Montmorency, General James Wolfe stands beneath a tattered canvas awning, reading casualty lists in silence. The summer has been unkind. His assault on the Montmorency Falls, a disastrous attempt to storm the French positions east of the city, cost hundreds of men. Rain turned the beach to mud. French fire from the cliffs cut down whole companies before they reached the shore. The failure gnaws at Wolfe's mind. He places his tent, restless, skeletal from illness. His officers whisper that the general has changed, that the brilliance which once inspired them now teeters on the edge of obsession. The siege grinds on. The British bombardment grows heavier, the gun crews working until their hands blister. The air is thick with smoke and insects, the stench of powder mingling with the rot of dead horses along the shore. Yet, for all this destruction, Quebec still stands. Montcalm's defenses, stretched thin but resilient, hold firm. The French guns answer every barrage, their accuracy devastating. British ships retreat again and again to repair their hulls. The fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, seems powerless against the stubborn rock of the city above. In the rare quiet hours, Wolfe retreats into solitude. His body is failing him. Fever, dysentery, perhaps something deeper. He spends long evenings writing letters home and fragments of poetry that blur the line between duty and despair. "I know that I shall die here," he confides in one note, "and I am content." In another, he writes of the beauty of Quebec's skyline. the way the sun touches the cliffs at dawn, as though he senses that both he and the city are caught in the same tragic light. To those around him, Wolfe is an enigma, cold in command, almost tender in reflection. He is fighting two wars, one against the French and one within himself. Meanwhile, the army decays in the heat. Scurvy spreads among the ranks. Rations spoil. Morale withers. Officers quarrel over strategy, while the soldiers mutter about returning to England. The Canadians, watching from across the river, taunt the redcoats with horns and drums. Even nature seems an enemy. Torrential rains flood the trenches, and lightning ignites stores of powder. The British guns fall silent for days, their ammunition soaked and useless. Wolfe's temper flares, then collapses into melancholy. "I would rather die," he tells a subordinate, "than fail in my duty to the king." It is both confession and prophecy. For Montcalm, the siege is a slow strangulation. Each week brings fewer supplies from the interior, fewer ships from France. The once proud French army has become a patchwork of regulars, colonial militia, and indigenous allies, brave, but hungry and exhausted. Still, Montcalm refuses to yield. He knows that to abandon Quebec would mean abandoning France itself. His letters home are filled with restrained anguish. "We are fighting against the elements. Against disease, against famine, and yet, against despair we must never surrender." The two generals are bound by the same torment. Both are sick, both trapped in the machinery of the empire, both aware that the campaign may consume them before it concludes. Between them lies the river, broad, silent, indifferent, reflecting the fires of their guns in its shifting current. It is as though St. Lawrence itself has become a mirror of their struggle. Two men, two nations, each burning toward exhaustion. As August drifts into September, the siege reaches its breaking point. Wolfe's superiors in London expect results. His soldiers expect relief. Neither is coming. The fleet's supplies run thin. The men's uniforms hang loose on their bodies. Even the general's letters begin to sound like elegies. Yet it is in this moment, when all seems lost, that Wolfe conceives the plan that will change the world. From fragments of reconnaissance and whispers, from local guides, a daring possibility emerges. A hidden cove west of the city, where the cliffs are steep but undefended. It is madness, a gamble so reckless it borders on suicide. But to Wolfe, it feels like deliverance. The siege has taught him that Quebec cannot be taken by force alone. It must be taken by surprise, by imagination, by the kind of courage that borders on desperation. He does not yet share the plan with his men. For now, the guns fall silent, and the river drifts under the fading light. In the distance, the walls of Quebec stand dark and immovable. But within Wolfe's fevered mind, something has shifted. Out of the ashes of failure, the shape of destiny begins to form. And as the long summer of siege draws to a close, the storm is only beginning. The guns have fallen silent. After months of thunder, the St. Lawrence River lies eerily calm, a mirror of the sky above, silvered by the first chill of September. The siege has reached its endgame. Nothing remains of strategy or supply, only the will of one man, and the thread of a desperate idea. General James Wolfe, pale and hollow-eyed from fever, now prepares to stake Britain's fate on a single night's deception. Every plan he has tried has failed. The frontal assaults at Montmorency shattered against the French defenses. Bombardment has scarred the city but not subdued it. Winter is fast approaching. Soon the river will freeze, trapping the fleet and condemning the army. In London, Pitt's dream of a global empire trembles on the edge of ruin. In Wolfe's tent, the weight of that dream rests heavy on his frail shoulders. He spends long hours bent over maps by candlelight, tracing the river's contours with trembling fingers. Then, one evening, a scout brings him a fragment of hope. A narrow inlet west of Quebec called the Anse au Foulon, steep, winding, and lightly guarded. To most, it sounds impossible. The cliffs there rise nearly 200 feet. The path is little more than a goat track. But to Wolfe, impossibility has become a necessity. Intelligence from local Canadian defectors suggests that Montcalm believes the British will strike again at Beauport, far to the east. If Wolfe can move upriver unseen, land his troops in darkness, and scale the cliffs before dawn, he could reach the plateau behind Quebec and force Montcalm into open battle on ground of his choosing. It is the kind of plan that separates the bold from the doomed, and in Wolfe's condition, the line between them is thin. His senior officers argue fiercely against it. Brigadier Monckton urges caution. Townshend warns that the current is treacherous, the cliffs insurmountable. Even Admiral Saunders, whose ships must carry the troops upriver, hesitates. But Wolfe listens in silence, his gaunt face unreadable. He knows what they do not, that this campaign has become his final act. The impossibility of the enterprise, he says quietly, is what makes it possible. The words hang in the air, at once madness and genius. For the first time in weeks, there is conviction in his voice. Preparations begin in absolute secrecy. Orders are whispered, not written. Boats are chosen for their silence. The men are told only that they are to embark at night for a feint against the enemy. Even they cannot yet grasp that they are about to attempt one of the most daring operations in British military history. The night before the assault, Wolfe walks among his regiments as they rest by the riverbank. He stops often, speaking softly to officers and men alike, offering words of calm and resolve. Though his body is weakened, his presence seems to steady them. To some, he appears almost serene, as if he knows that history itself is listening. In his tent later that night, Wolfe writes what may be his last letter. He thanks his mother for her prayers and assures her that whatever happens, he has done his duty. Then, in a final burst of melancholy grace, he copies verses from Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. The poem that has long haunted him, "The paths of glory lead but to the grave." It is not a lament, but a confession. To die in pursuit of victory, he believes, is to fulfill one's purpose. On the evening of September 12th, the army begins to move. The tide is with them. The moon is hidden behind clouds. 1,800 men drift silently upriver in small boats, their oars muffled with cloth. The current carries them swiftly through the darkness. Wolfe sits upright in the lead vessel, wrapped in his cloak, murmuring the lines of Gray's elegy as the black water glides past. Behind him, soldiers whisper prayers or stare blankly ahead, listening to the soft creak of wood and the hiss of the river against the hulls. Every man aboard knows that discovery means annihilation. The French sentries on the cliffs above hear movement but dismiss it as supply boats bringing provisions. A voice, fluent in French, calls out from one of Wolfe's vessels, an officer trained to mimic the local accent. It is enough to allay suspicion. The fleet drifts past unnoticed. Within an hour, the first boats reach the narrow cove of Anse-au-Foulon. The shore is dark and steep. Officers leap into the shallows, securing ropes and calling the men to disembark. Then begins the climb. The ascent is brutal, a fight against gravity itself. The men haul themselves upward with muskets slung behind, gripping roots and jagged stone. Some slip and fall, breaking bones in the dark. Above, the French picket is small and unprepared. When they hear the faint scrape of boots below, it is already too late. The redcoats surge over the rim, bayonets flashing in the dim light, and the guards scatter. Wolfe's troops secure the high ground, pulling more men and equipment up behind them. By the time the first streaks of dawn cut through the clouds, an entire British army stands assembled on the plains above. It is an astonishing feat, one born of desperation, discipline, and nerve. Behind them, the river winds like a silver snake through the valley. Before them lies Quebec, unaware that its fate has already been sealed. Wolfe surveys the field with calm satisfaction. His gamble has worked. The unthinkable has been done. Now, he knows, only one task remains, to draw Montcalm out and finish what he began. For the soldiers, there is no cheering, only breathless silence. They know what awaits them when the city wakes. The cliffs they have conquered may yet become their tomb. And yet, in this moment, they stand at the edge of greatness, the thin line between failure and immortality. As the first rays of dawn touch the plains of Abraham, Wolfe lowers his telescope and whispers a quiet command. The lines begin to form, muskets glinting in the pale light. Behind him, the river flows steady and indifferent, carrying the echo of empire. The gamble is complete. The battle, and the price of its success, is about to begin. The first light of dawn breaks over the heights of Abraham, painting the fields outside Quebec in muted gold. The air is still, the city walls silent, as if the world itself holds its breath. On the open plain, British redcoats stand in precise lines, two deep, unmoving, their bayonets glinting like a field of frozen fire. They are tired, hungry, still shaking from their night ascent, yet their formation is immaculate. Discipline has replaced exhaustion. Duty has silenced fear. Behind them, the St. Lawrence River glows with the faint light of morning. Before them, beyond the rising mist, lies the sleeping city that will decide an empire's fate. Wolfe rides slowly along the front, inspecting his men. His pale face is drawn and expressionless. His uniform hangs loose upon him. The soldiers watch him pass in silence, each aware they are in the presence of something rare. A commander who shares their danger, who will ask nothing of them that he would not endure himself. He stops, looks toward Quebec, and sees movement along the walls. Bells are ringing. Drums echo from the ramparts. The enemy is stirring. Now, he murmurs, let them come. Inside the city, alarms spread like wildfire. When word reaches Montcalm that the British are on the plains, disbelief turns quickly to horror. How could they have climbed the cliffs? How could an entire army have appeared where none was thought possible? But Montcalm is not a man to hesitate. He knows that to delay is to surrender. He orders his troops, regulars, militia, and local volunteers to form ranks and march out to meet the invaders. There is no time to wait for reinforcements. His men spill from the city gates, their blue coats and white crossbelts gleaming in the morning light. Church bells toll behind them as they descend the slope towards the plain. The French lines form hastily, unevenly, stretching across the field opposite the British. Between them lies a broad expanse of grass and stubble, the stage upon which the future of North America will be decided. The sun is climbing now, burning off the mist, revealing two armies facing each other in perfect symmetry, like reflections in a mirror. The silence between them is unbearable. Somewhere, a musket misfires. Then, all is still again. Wolfe positions his troops with clinical precision. The front ranks kneel. The second stand behind them, muskets leveled. He orders them to hold their fire until the enemy is within 40 paces. The men grip their weapons, waiting, hearts pounding. On the horizon, the French advance begins. A rolling surge of blue and white, drums beating, voices shouting, "Vive le roi!" The ground trembles beneath their march. The British hold. The distance closes, 100 yards, 80, 60. Wolfe raises his sword. Now! A thunderclap of musket fire shatters the morning calm. The British volley tears through the advancing French line. A single, devastating discharge of lead and smoke. Men drop by the hundreds. Their formations buckle. The French return fire in confusion, their ranks dissolving under the shock. Wolfe orders another volley, then another. The redcoats move like a living machine, their precision born of years of drill and the cold fury of survival. Within minutes, the field is cloaked in smoke and the cries of the wounded. In the chaos, Wolfe rides forward to steady his line. A musket ball strikes his wrist. Another tears through his side. He does not fall immediately. He continues to shout orders, voice hoarse but steady. Then a third shot pierces his chest. He staggers, supported by two grenadiers who carry him to the rear. "Don't let them see me fall," he whispers. They lay him down behind a low rise, the sound of battle roaring just beyond. Blood soaks his white waistcoat. His face turned ashen, but his eyes remained fixed on the field. On the opposite side, Montcalm rides through the smoke, trying to rally his disordered troops. His horse is struck. He takes a musket ball to the body, but fights to remain upright. "It's nothing," he insists to his aides, but his strength is ebbing. Around him, his soldiers are breaking. The British advanced slowly, methodically, bayonets fixed. The French line collapses, retreating towards the city in chaos. The entire battle, the most decisive engagement of the war, has lasted barely 15 minutes. As the firing fades, Wolfe's officers gather around him. "They run," one of them says. "See how they run." Wolfe opens his eyes, his breath shallow. "Who runs?" he asks faintly. "The enemy, sir," comes the reply. "Yet they give way everywhere." A faint smile touches his lips. "Now, God be praised," he whispers. "I will die in peace." Moments later, his head drops to one side. The young general who conquered Quebec dies before he can see the city fall. Montcalm, carried back through the city gates, will not live to see another dawn. When told he has but hours left, he replies simply, "So much the better. I shall not live to see Quebec surrender." The two men, rivals in war, equals in courage, die within hours of each other. Their bodies separated by a river, but bound forever by the same fate. When the smoke clears, the plain is strewn with the dead. British, French, Canadian, young men who only hours before had believed they would see the sun again. The grass is blackened, the air thick with the smell of powder and iron. Soldiers move among the fallen, searching for comrades, whispering prayers for both friend and foe. Above them, the wind shifts, carrying away the last echoes of battle towards the sea. The city's defenders retreat behind their walls, stunned by the swiftness of their defeat. The British, equally astonished, look upon their victory with reverence more than triumph. They know what it has cost, not just in lives, but in innocence. The fields that morning had been green. By afternoon, they were crimson. As the sun sinks over the river, Wolfe's body is carried to a waiting ship. The deck is silent, except for the soft creak of wood and the sound of the current against the hull. The sailors lower their heads as the flag is dipped in salute. On shore, Quebec burns, its walls cracked and smoking. The world has changed, though few yet understand how completely. The Battle of Quebec has ended, a victory so swift and terrible that it seems unreal. In 15 minutes, 2 empires have exchanged the future, and 2 men have given their lives to make it so. The river flows on beneath the darkening sky, indifferent and eternal, carrying with it the memory of that brief, blazing moment when history turned upon a breath. The smoke has barely lifted from the plains of Abraham when the bells of Quebec begin to toll, slow, mournful, almost disbelieving. The city that for a century has stood as the heart of New France now faces the unthinkable. Its defenders are broken, its walls fractured, its commanders dying. The ground outside the gates is carpeted with the fallen, their muskets lying silent beside them. And over the St. Lawrence River, where the morning mist once shrouded ambition, the sails of Britain's fleet gleam in the cold autumn light. The Empire's new dawn has arrived, carried not by ceremony, but by the stillness that follows ruin. Montcalm lies in a makeshift bed within the Ursuline convent, the same sanctuary that sheltered the city's children during the siege. He is calm, courteous even in defeat. When told that he will not survive the night, he whispers, "So much the better. I shall not live to see Quebec surrender." His words are not of bitterness but resignation, a soldier's quiet farewell to a world he can no longer defend. As night falls, he drifts into silence, the sound of cannon replaced by the tolling of the convent's bell. By morning, the French governor is dead, and with him dies the spirit of resistance. Across the river, aboard the British flagship Sutherland, another ceremony unfolds in the dark. Wolfe's body, wrapped in a Union Jack, lies in the ship's cabin, lit by the dim glow of lanterns. Officers gather in reverent quiet, their faces drawn with exhaustion and awe. Some had fought beside him that morning. Others still bear the powder burns of battle. They know that without him, none of them would be alive. And yet it was victory itself that killed him. The general who had longed for one decisive blow has found peace only in death. Outside, the river's current presses softly against the hull, as if urging the fleet onward toward destiny. When dawn returns, a white flag rises above Quebec's battered walls. The French garrison, their ammunition spent, their leaders lost, can fight no more. Negotiations are swift. On the 18th of September, the city formally surrenders. British troops march through the gates, drums muffled, colors furled. There is no cheering, only the measured tramp of boots and the echo of history being rewritten. For the first time, the Union Jack flies above Quebec, its fabric snapping in the wind where the fleur-de-lis once waved. To those who witness it, the moment feels both triumphant and terrible. Civilians watch from shuttered windows, torn between fear and relief. British soldiers move cautiously through the ruined streets, offering rations to the starving and water to the wounded. Even in conquest, the enormity of what they have done begins to settle over them. They have not merely captured a city, they have ended a civilization's dream. New France, that vast and fragile vision of Europe transplanted to the New World, now belongs to history. The human cost, however, remains. Wolfe's men, hardened by months of siege, now turn to the grimmer duty of burial. On the plains beyond the city, shallow graves stretch across the frost-hardened earth. British and French alike are laid side by side, their identities lost beneath the same soil. Chaplains recite prayers in both languages. The wind carries the words away. In one trench lie young men who only hours earlier had fought with blind courage for kings they would never meet. The fields that once shimmered with morning dew are now marked by wooden crosses, the first scars of the Empire carved into Canadian earth. Winter arrives early. The river begins to freeze, locking the British fleet in ice. Supplies run short. Disease returns. The conquerors become prisoners of their own success, enduring hunger and cold amid the ashes of victory. Yet, in their hardship, a strange clarity takes root. the realization that something vast has shifted. When spring comes, it will not be the same world. In London, news of the victory arrives weeks later, carried by a storm-battered frigate from the Atlantic. Crowds fill the streets. Church bells ring out from every parish. The name Quebec spreads across newspapers like a revelation. William Pitt weeps openly before Parliament, declaring Wolfe the soldier who redeemed his nation's honor. For Britain, this single triumph confirms the vision Pitt had risked everything to achieve. An empire of seas and continents, guided by resolve and enterprise. The French, by contrast, mourn not only the defeat, but the end of an era. Their North American empire has crumbled, their faith in destiny shaken, yet even amid celebration, a shadow lingers. The victory at Quebec did more than redraw maps. It redefined conscience. For those who fought there, glory and grief are indistinguishable. They remember Wolfe not as a conqueror, but as a man who believed that sacrifice could sanctify ambition. In taverns and ballads, his death becomes legend. Wolfe, the hero who died victorious. But in the quiet corners of remembrance, his story feels less like triumph and more like warning that every empire rises on the graves of men who thought they were saving it. By the year's end, Quebec endures under British occupation, its people caught between languages, loyalties, and the long winter ahead. The St. Lawrence lies silent, sealed in ice. Beneath it rests the memory of two generals, Wolfe and Montcalm, whose final meeting was fought not with words, but with destiny. Their graves, though miles apart, face the same river, as if forever in conversation. The snow falls thick and unbroken over the plains, covering the scars of battle, softening the outlines of death. From a distance, it looks almost peaceful, as though the land itself wishes to forget. But history does not forget. The conquest of Quebec has begun to reshape the world, its ripples reaching far beyond the frozen shores of Canada. Britain's empire has found its new heart, and as the last French tricolour is lowered into the cold wind, a new chapter of history begins to rise, one written in English, and paid for in blood. Years have passed since the thunder of cannon faded from the cliffs above the St. Lawrence. The plains where Wolfe and Montcalm fell are quiet now. A wide green expanse beneath the endless Canadian sky. Wildflowers grow among the old trenches, and the river flows as it always has, indifferent to the empires that rose and vanished along its banks. But the echoes of that September morning in 1759 still travel through time. What happened here did not merely end a war, it began an age. For Britain, Quebec became more than a victory, it became a revelation. The triumph transformed a maritime kingdom into a global power. In the years that followed, the Union Jack would fly over continents and oceans, from the Caribbean to Bengal. The war that had begun on the fringes of the empire now defined its center. The capture of Quebec severed France's hold over North America and opened a vast new frontier to British influence, and with it, a profound sense of destiny. Pitt's gamble had paid off. Britain's empire was no longer an idea. It was reality. Yet with this ascendance came an unease that time could not quiet. The men who had survived Quebec carried home stories that were neither triumphant nor simple. They spoke of comrades frozen in the Canadian winter, of ruined towns and empty churches, of the haunting silence after victory. For every cheer that echoed in London streets, there was a grave dug in foreign soil. The empire's birth, as ever, was baptized in suffering. Wolfe's name became legend, but even in celebration, Britain sensed the melancholy beneath it. The image of a young general who won everything only to die before he could see it. In the colonies of North America, the victory's meaning grew more complicated still. With France gone, the continent's balance shifted irrevocably. Britain now ruled an empire that stretched from the Arctic to the Caribbean, yet its new subjects were not all willing heirs. The French-speaking Canadians, spared by Pitt's relatively generous terms, remained loyal but wary. The indigenous nations, who had once played France and Britain against each other, now found themselves facing a single, unyielding power. Treaties were broken, alliances eroded. The same triumph that had secured Britain's dominance had also sown the seeds of future unrest. Even within Britain, the legacy of Quebec became a question of conscience. The war had drained the treasury. The cost of victory demanded new taxes, new control, new tensions with the very colonies it had defended. Within a generation, those tensions would ignite in the American Revolution. In a sense, Wolfe's victory, so absolute, so final, carried within it the birth of another rebellion. The empire that began at Quebec would fracture less than 2 decades later, proving that triumph is rarely permanent, and history seldom grants peace to those who seek dominion. Still, in the popular imagination, the myth endured. Paintings of Wolfe's death hung in parlors and academies, showing him as a saintly martyr of the empire, pale, noble, surrounded by reverent officers as light breaks through storm clouds. In that image, Britain saw not only a general, but an ideal. Courage, sacrifice, destiny fulfilled. It was easier to believe in that portrait than to face the truth. That empire is built not on glory alone, but on exhaustion, ambition, and the quiet grief of those who serve it. Across the ocean, in Quebec itself, the memory softened into something more human. The graves of Wolfe and Montcalm became sites of reflection rather than division. British soldiers tended Montcalm's tomb. French clergy prayed for Wolfe's soul. 2 enemies, united in death, came to symbolize the strange fraternity of war, that those who fight hardest against each other often share the same virtues. "They are both great and both unfortunate," wrote one chronicler, "and both now at rest." The world that rose from their struggle would never again be the same. Britain's empire expanded, France's influence waned, and the map of the modern world began to take shape. Yet beneath the triumph ran a quiet truth that all empires are temporary, and all victories fleeting. The winds that carried Wolfe's ships up the St. Lawrence would one day fill the sails of others, under different flags, pursuing their own versions of destiny. History, like the river, flows on, constant in motion, indifferent to the pride of man. And so the story of Quebec endures, the tale of 2 generals, 2 nations, and a moment when the fate of the world turned in less than an hour. Wolfe's grave in Greenwich and Montcalm's in Quebec remain forever divided by an ocean, yet bound by the same current of history. Standing on the plains today, one can still feel the weight of that morning, the wind moving through the grass where soldiers once stood, the faint echo of drums long vanished. Empires rise, and men fall, but the courage that binds them, that fragile, defiant belief that one act of will can change the world, remains. Wolfe died believing he had fulfilled his duty. Montcalm died believing he had preserved his honor. In their deaths, both were right. For the British Empire was born not in conquest alone, but in conviction, the unshakable faith that from sacrifice comes greatness. Yet history reminds us of its price. The victory at Quebec may have built an empire, but it also built a mirror, one that reflects the truth that every triumph is mortal, and that even the grandest of powers must one day face the same river, the same silence, and the same fate.